August 21st, 1942, 034 hours. Ilu River Sandbar, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell, 34 years old, from San Francisco, presses field binoculars against his eyes and watched hundreds of Japanese soldiers charge directly into his killing zone. The moonlight reflected off bayonets. Battle cries echoed across the sandbar, and the M1917A1 Browning water-cooled machine, guns positioned along the riverbank, had not yet opened fire. Cresswell commanded the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, for the past 18 hours, since Captain Charles Brush had captured Japanese documents revealing a major enemy force approaching from the east. Cresswell's Marines had prepared this position with methodical precision. 8 machine guns positioned to create interlocking fields of fire across a sandbar measuring 40 meters wide. 3 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds. Mortar crews with pre-registered fire missions. Artillery from the 11th Marines plotted and ready. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki, 44 years old, from Yamaguchi Prefecture, led 917 soldiers of the 28th Infantry Regiment's 1st element in this assault. Ichiki was an infantry school instructor, a veteran of China and Southeast Asia, a man who believed absolutely in Japanese warrior superiority over soft American troops. Before leaving Truk, he had received explicit orders to wait for reinforcements before attacking Henderson Field. He had ignored those orders. "These are Americans," he had told his officers. "We will sweep them into the sea before sunrise." At 034 hours, Cresswell gave the order, "Fire." What happened in the next 6 hours would become one of the most one-sided battles in Marine Corps history. And the first moment Japanese forces realized they had entered a war they could not win through courage alone. Before we continue with what happened in those next 6 hours that shattered every assumption Japanese military doctrine had built over 5 years of unbroken victory, if you're fascinated by these stories of impossible odds and the turning points that changed World War II, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We publish deeply researched documentaries every week. Now, back to Guadalcanal, August 21st, 1942, and the night Japanese Invincibility died on a sandbar. 14 days earlier, on August 7, 1942, at 6:13 hours, 11,000 United States Marines of the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore at Lunga Point, executing Operation Watchtower, the first American offensive operation of the Pacific War. Major General Alexander Archer Vandegrift, 55 years old, from Charlottesville, Virginia, commanded the division. His objective appeared straightforward: seize the nearly completed Japanese airfield, establish a defensive perimeter, hold until relieved. The reality would become the longest, most brutal campaign in Marine Corps history to that point. Guadalcanal measured 90 miles long, 25 miles wide. Mountains reaching 8,000 feet dominated the interior, their peaks perpetually shrouded in clouds. The coastal plain where the airfield sat was Kenai grass, swamp, and jungle so thick that visibility dropped to arm's length. Heat never dropped below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity never fell below 90%. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds so dense men inhaled them with every breath. The rivers that looked clear in reconnaissance photographs teemed with parasites. Malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and tropical ulcers would eventually disable more Marines than Japanese bullets. But on August 7th, the landing was almost unopposed. The 2,200 Japanese construction workers and 600 naval troops manning the airfield fled into the jungle, abandoning equipment, supplies, and most critically, the airfield itself. By nightfall August 8th, American engineers were completing the runway. They named it Henderson Field after Major Lofton Henderson, 39 years old, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. Within days, the first aircraft would land, fighters and dive bombers that would become known as the Cactus Air Force. The Japanese response was swift and catastrophic for American naval forces. On the night of August 8th to 9th, Vice Admiral Genichi Mikawa, 51 years old, led 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer through darkness in a brilliant surprise attack. The Battle of Savo Island became the worst defeat in United States Navy history. For heavy cruisers, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and HMS Canberra were sent to the bottom in less than an hour. More than 1,000 sailors died in flaming water. The surviving Allied naval forces withdrew, taking with them most supplies that had not yet been unloaded. The Marines were stranded. 11,000 men, cut off from supply, facing a reinforced enemy with barely half their equipment and 30 days' rations. What Japanese High Command failed to grasp was that Henderson Field had become the key to everything. Control of the airfield meant control of surrounding seas during daylight. Aircraft operating from Henderson could strike any Japanese ship within 200 miles. This single fact would dictate the entire campaign. The Japanese could own the night, sending troops and supplies aboard fast destroyers and runs that became known as the Tokyo Express. But when dawn broke, American aircraft ruled the skies. Imperial General Headquarters assigned the task of retaking Henderson Field to Lieutenant General Harakichi Hyakutake, 55 years old, commander of the 17th Army base at Rabaul. Hyakutake had limited forces immediately available. The 35th Infantry Brigade under Major General Kotake Kawaguchi was at Palau. The 4th Infantry Regiment was in the Philippines. The closest unit was Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment, stationed near Guam after the cancellation of the Midway operation. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki was 44 years old, an infantry school instructor with reputation as a first-rate tactician. He was also known for impulsiveness and supreme confidence in Japanese fighting spirit over American material superiority. Before departing truck for Guadalcanal, Ichiki received explicit written orders from General Hyakutake. Wait for the arrival of the regiment's remaining elements before attempting to retake the airfield. Do not engage in hasty action. Ichiki read the orders. Then he ignored them. He had studied every report from China, from the Philippines, from Malaya, everywhere Japanese forces had encountered Western troops. The pattern was consistent. They lacked discipline. They broke under pressure. They could not match Japanese warriors in close combat. On the night of August 18th, 6 destroyers delivered 917 men of Ichiki's first element to Taivu Point, 15 miles east of the American perimeter. The landing went undetected. Ichiki immediately sent reconnaissance patrols to assess enemy strength. On August 19th, at 12 o'clock hours, a patrol from Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, under Captain Charles Brush, 31 years old from Illinois, was moving along the coastal track when they spotted Japanese soldiers. The two forces collided in a brief, vicious firefight. The Marines killed 31 Japanese soldiers and captured documents that revealed everything: unit designation, strength, objectives, and most critically, Japanese intelligence estimates that showed they believed only 2,000 poorly trained Americans defended Henderson Field. Captain Brush raced back to the perimeter with his intelligence haul. General Vandegrift immediately understood what was coming: a Japanese attack, soon, probably from the east. He ordered Colonel Clifton Cates, 49 years old from Tennessee, to strengthen defenses along the sandbar at the mouth of what Marines were calling the Tenaru River. It was actually the Ilu River, but the misidentification would stick in all subsequent accounts. Cates deployed Lieutenant Colonel Cresswell's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines along the riverbank with 8 machine guns positioned to create interlocking fields of fire across the sandbar. What happened next would establish a pattern that would repeat throughout the Guadalcanal campaign. Colonel Ichiki, rather than waiting for intelligence from his lost patrol or for the reinforcements his orders required, decided to attack immediately. His plan followed standard Japanese infantry doctrine perfected in China and Malaya: overwhelming night assault using superior Japanese fighting spirit and close-quarters combat expertise to overcome enemy firepower. His veterans had broken Chinese defensive lines this way dozens of times. They had routed British forces in Malaya using identical tactics. Ichiki believed, and Japanese doctrine taught, that aggressive infantry attacking at night with bayonets and grenades could close the distance before enemy machine guns became effective. Once in close combat, Japanese soldiers, superbly trained in hand-to-hand fighting, would dominate. The plan had one critical flaw. It assumed American forces would fight like the Chinese and British forces Japanese troops had previously defeated. On August 20th, just after midnight, Solomon Island scout Jacob Vuza, 40 years old from nearby Maleta Island, stumbled into Marine lines. Vuza had been captured by Japanese patrols hours earlier. They had tortured him for hours, bayoneting him through the chest and arms, leaving him tied to a tree to die. Try and extract information about American positions. Vuza had revealed nothing. He had chewed through his bindings and crawled 3 miles to Marine lines. Blood poured from 7 bayonet wounds. He could barely speak. His message: Japanese coming. Many, tonight. Minutes later, at 0:34 hours on August 21st, the attack began. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers charged across the sandbar, screaming battle cries, firing rifles, hurling grenades. They ran directly into the killing zone Cresswell's Marines had prepared with methodical precision. The 8 M1917A1 Browning water-cooled machine guns opened fire simultaneously. These weapons, perfected during World War I, were the unsung heroes of Marine firepower. Each gun could sustain 600 rounds per minute indefinitely as long as the water jacket stayed filled and ammunition fed. The Marines had positioned them in mutually supporting positions so that no area of the sandbar remained uncovered. Sergeant Al Schmid, 23 years old from Philadelphia, manned one of the guns. When his loader was killed, Private First Class Lee Diamond took over. When Diamond was wounded, Schmid continued firing alone, traversing the gun across the sandbar, cutting down Japanese soldiers in groups of 3 and 4. The heavy .30 caliber rounds, each weighing 152 grains, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, tore through flesh and bone. Japanese soldiers fell in waves. Those who made it across the sandbar encountered the 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, essentially giant shotgun shells packed with steel balls that turned men into shredded meat at 50 meters. The attack continued for hours. Wave after wave charged into machine gun fire. Some Japanese soldiers made it to Marine positions and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Marines fought with rifles, knives, fists, entrenching tools, anything available, but the defensive preparations held. The interlocking fields of fire prevented any breakthrough. Sergeant Schmid's gun position became critical. Japanese soldiers concentrated their assault on his sector, trying to overwhelm the position through sheer numbers. A grenade exploded near Schmid's face, blinding him. He continued firing by sound and by Diamond's shouted directions until Japanese soldiers were literally at the gun's muzzle. Private Diamond dragged the blinded Schmid to safety. Both would receive the Navy Cross. As dawn approached, Colonel Ichiki's attack had completely stalled. More than 600 of his men lay dead or dying on the sandbar and in the shallow water. Daybreak brought no relief for surviving Japanese forces. General Vandegrift ordered a counterattack using elements of 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, 5 M3 Stuart light tanks, 6-ton vehicles mounting 37mm guns and .30 caliber machine guns, crossed the sandbar and began systematically hunting Japanese soldiers who had taken cover in coconut groves beyond the river. War correspondent Richard Tregiskis, 32 years old from New Jersey, watched from a Marine position. His account, later published in Guadalcanal Diary, described the scene. It was fascinating and terrible to see them bustling amongst the trees, pivoting, turning, spitting sheets of yellow flame. We had not realized there were so many Japanese in the grove. Group after group were flushed out and shot down by the tank's canister shells and machine guns. By midday, August 21st, the Battle of the Tenaru was over. Of 917 Japanese soldiers who had landed at Taivu Point, approximately 800 were dead. Approximately 128 survivors, mostly from support units that had remained near the landing site, melted into the jungle. They would send a radio message to 17th Army headquarters reporting the disaster. Among the dead was Colonel Ichiki. Accounts differ on how he died. The official Japanese version claimed he burned his regimental colors and committed ritual suicide. Some Marine witnesses insisted he died leading a final charge. Marine casualties, 35 killed, 75 wounded. The casualty ratio, approximately 20 Japanese soldiers killed for every Marine killed, established a pattern that would define the Guadalcanal campaign. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese soldiers was devastating. Captured documents and post-war accounts revealed the shock of learning that an entire regiment had been annihilated in a single night. Private Jiro Suzuki, 22 years old from Hokkaido, one of the few survivors of the Tenaru, was captured weeks later after his supplies ran out. His interrogation transcript, declassified in 1947, captured the fundamental shift in Japanese understanding. We were taught Americans were weak. They would panic under night attack. They would break when we charged with bayonets. Instead, they waited in positions. They had many machine guns. The machine guns never stopped. Our officers kept ordering attacks. We kept dying. Nothing we did worked. The Americans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like a machine that kills. This assessment, they fought like a machine, appeared repeatedly in Japanese accounts from Guadalcanal. It reflected profound realization. American forces did not rely on individual warrior skill or fighting spirit. They relied on systems. Systems for interlocking fire. Systems for calling artillery support. Systems for medical evacuation. Systems for resupply. Every system functioned because American logistics supported them. Japanese logistics, by contrast, were failing from the beginning. Within days of the Tenaru disaster, more Japanese forces were already en route to Guadalcanal. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, 58 years old, organized a massive naval operation to support the next attempt to retake Henderson Field. 3 slow transport ships departed truck on August 16th, carrying the remaining 1,400 soldiers from Ichiki's regiment plus 500 naval troops. After the naval battle of the Eastern Solomons resulted in heavy damage to 1 transport, Japanese command abandoned slow ships entirely. Instead, they would use destroyers for what became known as the Tokyo Express runs, high-speed nighttime deliveries that American forces nicknamed the Rat Run. Between August 29th and September 4th, destroyers and light cruisers delivered approximately 5,000 troops of Major General Koguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade to Taivu Point. The Tokyo Express worked brilliantly as a method of moving men. Destroyers could make the round trip from Shortland Islands to Guadalcanal in a single night, minimizing exposure to American air attack. But the method had a critical weakness. Heavy equipment could not be transported this way. Artillery pieces, tanks, trucks, and most importantly, adequate food and ammunition had to be left behind. This logistical reality would doom every Japanese offensive on Guadalcanal. Soldiers arrived with only what they could carry. They depended on foraging and whatever supplies could be infiltrated through American lines. As the campaign wore on, Japanese troops would fight not just against American firepower, but against starvation itself. Major General Kawaguchi, 48 years old from Kyoto, set September 12th as the date for his assault on Henderson Field. His plan called for a 3-pronged attack. 1 force would strike from the west. A second would attack from the south, penetrating through dense jungle. Kawaguchi himself would lead the main effort from the south, approaching along an inland ridge that dominated Henderson Field. What Kawaguchi did not know was that Marine intelligence had already identified this ridge as the most likely avenue of approach. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Edson, 45 years old from Vermont, commanding officer of 1st Raider Battalion, conducted a raid on Tasumboko village on September 8th and discovered massive supply dumps, indicating a large Japanese force was concentrating in the area. Edson immediately understood the Japanese plan. They would come from the south, using the ridge as their approach route. He requested permission to establish a defensive line on the ridge itself. General Vandegrift approved. On September 10th to 11th, Edson positioned approximately 840 Marines from his Raiders and 1st Parachute Battalion along the ridge. He selected defensive positions with the same methodical care that had characterized Tenaru defenses. Machine guns positioned to create interlocking fire, mortar crews with pre-registered targets, artillery from 11th Marines with plotted defensive fire missions. The ridge itself was a narrow coral spine approximately 1,000 meters long, consisting of 3 distinct hills covered with kanai grass and scattered trees. Deep ravines bordered both sides, heavily wooded, in some places impenetrable. It was perfect terrain for a night attack by infiltrating infantry. It was also, if properly defended, a killing ground. On the night of September 12th, Kawaguchi's forces began their assault. Unlike Ichiki's frontal charge, this was more sophisticated. Japanese infantry infiltrated through ravines on both sides of the ridge, attempting to envelop American positions. Small units probed for weak points. When they found them, larger forces concentrated for breakthrough attempts. The fighting was savage and confused. In darkness, Marines sometimes found themselves engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Japanese soldiers who had infiltrated to within grenade range. But the defensive preparations held. When Japanese forces concentrated for breakthrough attempts, Marine mortars and artillery shattered them. The 11th Marines fired more than 2,000 rounds during the night, dropping high-explosive shells so close to Marine positions that shrapnel wounded friendly troops. Machine gun crews fired until their barrels glowed red in the darkness. Sergeant Major Jacob Vuzza, the same scout who had warned of the Tenaru attack, moved through the lines despite still recovering from his bayonet wounds, encouraging Marines and pointing out Japanese infiltration routes. Sergeant John Basilone, 26 years old from New Jersey, manned a machine gun position that became critical to the defense. When his gun crews were killed or wounded, Basilone continued firing alone, repelling wave after wave of Japanese attacks. He would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that night. As dawn broke September 13th, the Japanese attack had failed to break through, but Kawaguchi had more troops available and prepared to renew the assault the following night. Edson pulled his lines back to the center of the ridge, consolidating forces. General Vandegrift sent reinforcements, bringing the total defending force to approximately 2,500 men. The second night's fighting was even more intense. Kawaguchi threw his remaining forces into desperate attempts to break through before American reinforcements made the position impregnable. Japanese soldiers charged repeatedly, dying by hundreds of machine gun fire. Some attacks came within 50 yards of Edson's command post before being stopped. At one point, the situation was so desperate that Edson himself grabbed a rifle and joined the firing line, shouting to his Marines, "They're testing you. Show them what you're made of." Sergeant Basilone's actions again proved critical. When ammunition ran low for his machine gun section, Basilone personally carried ammunition to enemy fire to keep guns operational. He repaired damaged machine guns under fire. When one gun position was overrun, he grabbed a .45 pistol and led a counterattack that restored the line. By dawn September 14th, Kawaguchi's offensive had completely collapsed. Japanese casualties, approximately 830 to 850 killed. Marine casualties, 104 killed. Over 200 wounded between Raider and Parachute battalions. The ridge would forever have to be known as Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge, a monument to the effectiveness of American defensive doctrine. For Japanese soldiers who survived, the battle represented another profound shock. Captured diaries and post-war accounts consistently described the same realization. Japanese forces had expected to fight infantry in darkness where their training and spirit would triumph. Instead, they encountered artillery, machine guns, and mortars, all concentrated with precision they could not match. American commanders knew the Japanese were coming. They prepared killing zones. They waited for Japanese forces to enter. Then they destroyed them with coordinated firepower. A captured diary from Lieutenant Kenji Otsuka, 28 years old, found on his body after the second night, contained this entry dated September 14th. "We attacked with all our strength. We charged with bayonets. We died by hundreds. The Americans never panicked. Their machine guns never stopped. Our officers say we lack fighting spirit, but spirit cannot stop bullets. I do not think we can win this battle." He was correct. By October, the fundamental problem facing Japanese forces on Guadalcanal had become impossible to hide: starvation. The Tokyo Express could deliver men, but not adequate supplies. Soldiers who arrived on the island with field rations found those rations exhausted within days. Foraging provided some food, coconuts, roots, whatever could be scavenged, but nowhere near the calories required for men engaged in combat operations. A Japanese medical officer's report from late October, captured after the war, painted a horrifying picture. More than 60% of 17th Army forces on Guadalcanal are incapacitated by disease or malnutrition. Combat effectiveness has dropped to perhaps 30% of authorized strength. Soldiers are dying at a rate of 50 per day, most from starvation and disease rather than combat wounds. Quinine for malaria prevention is exhausted. Medical supplies are non-existent. We can do nothing except watch men die. American supply ships, protected by Henderson Field aircraft during daylight, regularly delivered food, ammunition, medical supplies, and replacement equipment. Marines ate canned rations that, while unappetizing, provided adequate calories and nutrition. Ammunition was plentiful. Medical care included field hospitals with surgical capabilities. The contrast could not have been more stark. In late October, General Hyakutake himself came to Guadalcanal to personally command what would be the largest Japanese offensive of the campaign. He brought elements of 2nd Division, including experienced troops from China. The plan called for coordinated attacks from multiple directions, with the main effort coming from the south through dense jungle, similar to the Bloody Ridge approach, but with more men, better coordination, and artillery support finally delivered via destroyers. The offensive began October 23rd with a preliminary attack from the west. 9 Japanese tanks, rare on Guadalcanal because of transport difficulties, led an assault across the Mattanacaw River. American defenders were ready. Anti-tank guns, artillery, and an M3 Stuart tank knocked out all 9 Japanese tanks in quick succession. The attack collapsed with heavy casualties. The main assault came on the night of October 24th to 25th. Approximately 5,600 Japanese troops under Major General Yumio Nasu, 51 years old, attacked from the south. They faced 1st Battalion, 7 Marines under Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, 44 years old, from Virginia, reinforced by elements of 164th Infantry Regiment. The fighting that night became legendary in Marine Corps history. Japanese attacks came in waves throughout the night. Individual breakthroughs were sealed by immediate counterattacks. Machine gunners fired until weapons failed, then grabbed rifles and continued fighting. Sergeant Basilone, who had distinguished himself at Bloody Ridge, again became critical. When ammunition ran low, he personally carried ammunition through enemy fire. He repaired damaged machine guns under fire. When one position was overrun, he led a counterattack that restored the line. By dawn October 25th, the Japanese offensive had failed. General Nasu was dead, killed by machine gun fire during one of the night attacks. More than 2,000 Japanese soldiers died. American casualties were several hundred killed and wounded, severe but sustainable. October-November 1942 saw major naval engagements that decisively shifted the balance of power around Guadalcanal. The naval Battle of Guadalcanal, fought over 4 days from November 12th to 15th, saw some of the most intense surface combat in naval history. On the night of November 12th to 13th, in a confused nighttime melee, American cruisers and destroyers engaged a Japanese bombardment force that included battleships Hai and Kirishima. Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan, 53 years old from San Francisco, commanded American forces. He died when a Japanese shell struck his flagship's bridge. Rear Admiral Norman Scott, 53 years old from Indiana, also died in the fighting. The only 2 American flag officers killed in World War II surface engagements. Americans lost 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers, but the Japanese lost battleship Hai, disabled in the night action, sunk by aircraft the following day. More importantly, the bombardment mission failed. Henderson Field remained operational. On the night of November 14th to 15th, battleship Kirishima attempted another bombardment, but was intercepted by USS Washington and USS South Dakota. In a devastating display of American radar-directed gunnery, Washington put 9 16-inch shells into Kirishima at ranges where Japanese lookouts could barely see their target. Kirishima sank with heavy loss of life. Perhaps most significantly, American aircraft and surface ships destroyed a Japanese convoy attempting to land the 38th Division with heavy equipment. Of 11 transport ships, only 4 reached Guadalcanal, and these were destroyed by aircraft and artillery before they could fully unload. Japanese casualties from the convoy exceeded 5,000 men. This was the last serious attempt to reinforce Guadalcanal with a large, properly equipped ground force. For Japanese troops already on the island, November marked the beginning of the end. They had expected reinforcement and resupply. Instead, they learned that naval battles had failed, that convoys were destroyed, that no more help was coming. Rations were reduced again. Already starving men were told to survive on even less. Captured Japanese diaries from this period painted a picture of slow collapse. Private Hiroshi Tanaka, 23 years old from Osaka, diary entry November 18, 1942. Rice ration now 1 ball per day. Many men too weak to stand. Disease everywhere. We burn bodies when we have strength. I think no more supplies are coming. I do not know how much longer I can write. That was his final entry. Corporal Masao Ito, 25 years old, diary entry November 27th. Ate grass today. 3 men in my squad died yesterday. Not from bullets. From hunger. Americans have food. We can smell it cooking. We have nothing. I understand now we cannot win. Medical supplies that had been critically short became non-existent. The sick and wounded filled makeshift field hospitals where doctors could do nothing except watch men die. Soldiers ate grass, bark, roots, anything. Deaths from poisonous plants became common. By December, the 17th Army on Guadalcanal had deteriorated from a fighting force to a collection of starving, disease-ridden men struggling simply to survive. Japanese command at Rabaul made a decision in late December. Evacuate Guadalcanal. They could not admit defeat publicly, but privately they recognized that continuing the operation meant the complete destruction of the 17th Army. Approximately 11,000 Japanese soldiers remained on the island, down from a peak strength of 36,000. Of those 11,000, perhaps 7,000 were fit enough to walk. The rest were sick, wounded, or so weakened by starvation they could barely crawl. The evacuation, designated Operation Key, would be one of the most successful Japanese operations of the entire war. Using destroyer runs similar to the Tokyo Express, Japanese naval forces extracted 10,652 men over 3 nights in early February 1943. It was a remarkable achievement under difficult circumstances, but it could not disguise the magnitude of defeat. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal reached peak strength of approximately 36,000 personnel. Of these, approximately 14,800 killed in combat, approximately 10,000 to 15,000 died from disease and starvation. 652 evacuated, fewer than 1,000 captured alive. American casualties were also severe but sustainable. Approximately 1,600 killed in action, 200 wounded, several thousand temporarily disabled by tropical diseases. But American industry and manpower could replace these losses. New divisions were training. Ships and aircraft were being produced faster than they could be lost. The strategic initiative had permanently shifted. The psychological impact of Guadalcanal on Japanese military thought cannot be overstated. For the first time, Japanese forces had been defeated in sustained ground combat. Every offensive had failed. Every attempt to apply traditional Japanese tactical doctrine had resulted in catastrophic casualties. Post-war interviews with Japanese veterans who survived Guadalcanal consistently emphasized several themes. First, they had completely underestimated American fighting qualities. Americans were not weak, not undisciplined, not easily frightened. They were formidable opponents who fought with skill, courage, and determination. Second, the disparity in equipment and supplies was far greater than intelligence had suggested. American forces possessed wealth of material that seemed inexhaustible. Third, Japanese logistics were fundamentally inadequate. The Tokyo Express could move men, but not supplies. Without adequate food, medicine, and ammunition, no amount of courage could sustain combat operations. Fourth, spiritual power and tactical skill were insufficient against systematic disadvantages in firepower and resources. The technical aspects of American superiority were significant and measurable. Small arms. Japanese forces fought with Arisaka bolt-action rifles requiring manual cycling between shots. American Marines carried M1 Garand semi-automatic rifles with 8-round capacity. In firefights, this difference was decisive. American riflemen could maintain suppressive fire, while Japanese soldiers had to pause to work bolts. Machine guns. American M1917A1 Brownings were water-cooled and could sustain fire indefinitely as long as water and ammunition were available. Japanese Type 96 and Type 99 machine guns were lighter and more portable but lacked sustained fire capability. In defensive positions, this difference was catastrophic for attacking Japanese forces. Artillery. The 11th Marines operated M1A1 105mm howitzers that could be transported through jungle terrain. Forward observers with infantry units could call fire missions and receive rounds within minutes. Japanese artillery on Guadalcanal was limited, difficult to move, and chronically short of ammunition. Naval gunfire. Destroyers and cruisers offshore could deliver bombardments on Japanese positions or provide responsive fire support. Radio communication between shore-based observers and naval ships allowed precise targeting. Japanese forces had no equivalent capability. Air power. The Cactus Air Force operating from Henderson Field gradually established air superiority. Marine and Army Air Force pilots flying F-4F Wildcats, P-39 Airacobras, and P-40 Warhawks intercepted Japanese bomber raids. SBD Dauntless dive bombers struck Japanese positions and supply concentrations. Japanese air forces from Rabaul had to fly at extreme range limits, giving minimal time over target. Post-war testimonies from Japanese veterans reveal consistent assessments. Colonel Suji Masanobu, 40 years old, a staff officer who visited Guadalcanal during the campaign, wrote afterward, "The Americans were fighting an industrial war where material production determined outcomes. Japan could not win an industrial war against American productive capacity. We needed to completely reassess strategy. But our military culture, built on generations of tradition and recent victories, could not easily accept such fundamental revision." Private Suzuki, one of the few Tenaru survivors, interviewed in 1947, "We believed we were superior warriors. We trained harder, accepted death more readily, mastered night fighting and close combat. But on Guadalcanal, we learned that war is decided by systems. The Americans had systems for everything. Systems for supply, for medical care, for artillery support, for air coordination. Every system functioned. Our systems failed because they were never built properly." Lieutenant Oishi Tamatsu, 29 years old, captured in December 1942 after his unit supplies ran out. Interrogation transcript. "I fought in China for 3 years. We always won. Chinese forces had courage, but no organization. We broke them with night attacks and close combat. On Guadalcanal, Americans fought differently. They waited in positions. They used firepower, not bravery. When we attacked, they killed us with machines. Machine guns that never stopped. Artillery that landed exactly where they wanted. We could not match them. not because we lacked courage, but because they had systems we did not. For Marines and soldiers who fought on Guadalcanal, the campaign proved that American forces could match Japanese troops in the brutality of jungle combat. The mythology of Japanese invincibility was destroyed. American defensive doctrine worked. Combined arms coordination was effective. Individual American soldiers, properly trained and equipped, were more than capable of defeating Japanese forces. But Americans also learned respect for Japanese soldiers as tough, determined, skilled adversaries who would fight to the death rather than surrender. The willingness of Japanese forces to continue attacking in face of hopeless odds, to endure starvation rather than give up, to die rather than retreat, made a profound impression. Sergeant Mitchell Page, 24 years old from Pennsylvania, who earned the Medal of Honor at Bloody Ridge, said in a 1944 interview, "The Japanese were the toughest enemy I ever want to face. They didn't quit. They didn't surrender. They kept coming even when it was suicide. But we learned we could beat them. Not easily, but we could beat them if we use our advantages. Firepower, supplies, coordination. The jungle didn't belong to them. It belonged to whoever controlled the logistics." Guadalcanal's strategic significance extended far beyond the island itself. Japan's failure to retake Henderson Field and the eventual evacuation demonstrated that the Japanese defensive perimeter could be penetrated. Allied strategies shifted from defensive operations to offensive campaigns. The industrial and material advantages America possessed could be translated into military victory if applied systematically. For Japan, Guadalcanal marked the beginning of the end. The loss of experienced troops, pilots, and ships could not be replaced at anything approaching the rate America was producing new forces. The decision to evacuate admitted, however quietly, that Japan could not sustain attritional warfare against American industrial might. The human cost was staggering on both sides. Naval battles. More than 7,000 American and Japanese sailors died in naval engagements around the island. Ground combat. American, 1,600 killed, 4,200 wounded Japanese. 14,800 killed in combat, 10,000 to 15,000 from disease/starvation. Disease, thousands more on both sides suffer from malaria, dysentery, and tropical diseases that would affect their health for life. But the strategic significance justified, in military terms, the terrible cost. Guadalcanal represented the turning point where Allied forces shifted from defense to offense in the Pacific. The lessons learned on Guadalcanal shaped the rest of the Pacific War. For America, combined arms coordination was essential. Air superiority determined ground outcomes. Logistics won campaigns' offensive positions with concentrated firepower, defeated Japanese tactics. For Japan, warrior spirit alone could not overcome material disadvantages. Night attacks and close combat failed against prepared positions. Logistics were not secondary, but fundamental. The war could not be won through military means alone. On February 9th, 1943, American patrols discovered that Japanese forces had evacuated Guadalcanal. General Alexander Patch, 53 years old, commanding 14th Corps, sent his famous message to Admiral Halsey. Tokyo Express no longer has terminus on Guadalcanal. 6 months of fighting had resulted in the first major American ground victory against Japan. More importantly, it established patterns and revealed truths that would shape the rest of the war. The story of Japanese troops encountering American jungle warfare on Guadalcanal is ultimately a story about the collision between two fundamentally different approaches to modern warfare. One side believed in supremacy of warrior spirit, encouraged overcoming material disadvantages, in tactics producing victory regardless of resources. The other side believed in systematic application of industrial power, in logistics and firepower as force multipliers, in combined arms coordination as the key to success. The jungle of Guadalcanal became the crucible where these conflicting philosophies met. The outcome, though it took 6 months of brutal fighting to reach, demonstrated that when concentrated firepower, logistics, and competent tactics combined with determined soldiers, they create a form of military power that Japanese forces simply could not match. For Japanese soldiers who survived Guadalcanal, the campaign represented the moment when reality destroyed illusion. They learned their training had been based on false assumptions. Their tactics had been designed for a different kind of war. Their logistics had been inadequate from the beginning, and their nation was engaged in a conflict it could not win. The Americans who fought on Guadalcanal learned they could match Japanese soldiers in combat brutality. They proved American industrial power could translate into military victory. They developed tactics for jungle warfare that would serve well in subsequent campaigns. And they shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility, replacing it with realistic assessment of a tough, determined, but ultimately defeatable enemy. August 21st, 1942, at 0:34 hours, when Lieutenant Colonel Cresswell gave the order to open fire on Ichiki's charging regiment, marked more than the beginning of one battle. It marked the moment the tide turned in the Pacific War, the moment Japanese forces discovered that courage and spirit, however admirable, could not overcome the systematic, overwhelming, relentless application of American firepower and industrial resources. The jungle that shattered Japanese invincibility was not just terrain. It was a proving ground where reality defeated mythology, where systems defeated spirit, and where the outcome of the Pacific War became, for those who understood what they were witnessing, inevitable.